In this recording, we'll discuss an introduction to the digestive system. Your digestive system is a set of organs that assist with breaking down food that you eat into the nutrients that are absorbed into the bloodstream. Digestion includes both mechanical and chemical breakdown of the foods that we ingest, and absorption includes the transport of those nutrients from your GI tract into the bloodstream so they can be transported to the rest of the body. Now, your digestive system contains two categories of organs. We have the organs of the alimentary canal, which is probably better known as either your gastrointestinal or GI tract, or even your digestive tract. So those are all the same thing. And then we have your accessory organs. Now, your GI tract, the organs associated with your GI tract are basically forming one continuous tube through which food passes through. We begin with the oral cavity, better known as your mouth, before we move through the pharynx, the esophagus, onto the stomach, then the small intestines and the large intestine. And at the end of the large intestine, we have an opening where feces can exit through the anus. Now, along this pathway, we are both digesting and absorbing food particles, and by the time we get to the end of the tract, we are eliminating waste products. Now, your accessory organs, these are located around the GI tract itself and include the teeth, the tongue, the salivary glands, the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas. These contribute digestive secretions that assist with the chemical breakdown of food, and your teeth also are responsible for helping with mechanical breakdown of your food. Just so we can get a visual representation of what we're talking about here, you can see your alimentary canal is one big old tube. It is a twisty tube, but it's still a tube. Boop, boop, boop. And then you can see around the tube, we've got your accessory organs. Okay? All right, now we've got our picture in our minds. Okay, so the alimentary canal, the organs that compose the canal itself, all basically have the same composition, histologically speaking. We have concentric layers of tissue that form a space in the center known as the lumen. This is a term that we've come across in the past when we talked about, for example, blood vessels. Okay, so again, the lumen is the center space where blood in the blood vessels travels, or in our case here, now we're talking about food and gastric secretions moving through the lumen of the digestive system. The alimentary canal, most of the regions, contain 4 layers, okay, and again, they're going to be concentric layers, from deep to superficial. Okay, the innermost layer is going to be mucosa. This is going to be epithelial tissue. Next, we have submucosa, which is connective tissue. Next is the Muscularis externa, which is smooth muscle tissue. And the outermost layer is your serosal layer, which is, again, connective tissue. And you know where this is going. Let's do one at a time in detail. So, your innermost layer, okay, the mucosa. In addition to the epithelial tissue, we do have 2 additional components as well. So, the epithelial tissue specifically is simple columnar epithelial tissue. This is found from the stomach all the way down to the anus. Notice that we did not start in the oral cavity. We are not including the pharynx and the esophagus here. Those are different types of epithelial tissue. But the simple columnar epithelial tissue also does contain goblet cells. Hopefully you remember that the purpose of a goblet cell is to secrete mucus. This mucus does have an alkaline property to it, which is there to help protect us from the acidic nature of the stomach secretions specifically. So the mucus coats and protects the simple columnar tissue. We also find a very thin layer of loose connective tissue. Within this layer, we have blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, glands, and then your MALT, your mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue. Okay, so hopefully we remember back the association between your lymphatic system, okay, specifically the lymph vessels. If you remember the term lacteal, okay, lacteals are responsible for helping absorb fat from the digestive system, and then your MALT is one of the ways that we try to trap any kind of foreign invaders that we may have consumed with our food. And then that third component, that Muscularis mucosa, this is 2 thin layers of muscle tissue. You already know that your smooth muscle tissue is regulated by your autonomic nervous system, so this is involuntarily controlled. Next, we come to your submucosal layer. This is dense, irregular connective tissue. We also have blood vessels and lymphatic vessels here as well. We are adding on submucosal glands, okay, so an additional secretion. We do find something interesting here. We have nerve clusters from your enteric nervous system. This is a subcategory of your autonomic nervous system. Sometimes you'll hear it termed submucosal plexus or even Meissner's plexus. We just mentioned that your smooth muscle found within your alimentary canal would be regulated by your autonomic nervous system. So now we're just giving those nerves a name, basically. Okay. These plexuses help regulate the secretions from all of the glands that we keep mentioning, as well as regulating the blood flow to areas of the alimentary canal when we are doing digestion. Your submucosa is also responsible for helping connect your mucosal layer that we just talked about to your muscularis layer that we're getting ready to talk about. And we do have elastic fibers in here as well that allow for the stomach to recoil. So when you fill up your stomach, it has to stretch out, but when you empty your stomach, it has to recoil and go back to its original shape and size. Just very quickly, a nice histological picture. We've got the mucosal layer. It's kind of difficult to tell, but these are the columnar epithelial cells, okay, that we've mentioned. But you can, if you look really hard, see that there are 4 distinct layers here. You can see the fibers run in different patterns for the 4 layers. Okay. Here's our 4th layer. Okay, so your muscularis externa is actually 2 layers of muscle. Okay, and then here's your serosa. You can see all these little fat blobs. Okay. All right. So, okay. 3rd layer, your muscularis externa. Okay. You have 2 layers of smooth muscle, and they're just arranged in a different pattern. We have an inner layer that is arranged in a circular fashion, and then the outer layer is arranged in a longitudinal fashion. The 2 different arrangements of the muscle fibers are what help with peristalsis and segmentation. Peristalsis and segmentation are what we use to move food through the digestive tract itself. Okay? And these 2 muscle layers are also responsible for thickening in certain regions, and that's how we develop sphincters, or if you prefer the term valves. So if you remember, we have a cardiac sphincter, okay, that allows food to go from the esophagus into the stomach. We have a pyloric sphincter that allows food to go from the stomach into the duodenum. Okay, so these sphincters, or these valves, these are your muscularis externa layer. Okay. In order to regulate how quickly or how slowly food moves through the food from peristalsis and segmentation, we do also have nerves of the enteric nervous system that run through the muscularis layer also. Okay, so if we go back to that picture, we had your mucosa, your submucosa. Okay, this one layer, this giant layer, this is your muscularis externa, and these 2 layers. Okay, and it's actually kind of easy to see the dividing line here. These are both smooth muscles, so why do they look different? The fibers are running in a different direction. Okay, so one part of this layer is running more like a left to right pattern, and the other layer is more of an up and down pattern. Okay, so circular versus longitudinal. Okay, and then there's that 4th layer. So that's kind of what you're seeing here. All right, the fibers are just running in different directions. All right, outer layer, last layer. Okay, this is your serosa. Okay, you might hear it termed mesentery, and that's fine as well. It's all this shiny stuff. Okay, it's all this shiny stuff. You could even hear it called your visceral peritoneum, and that is a word we have thrown around quite a bit, so that might be familiar to you at this point. This is simple squamous epithelial tissue, as well as a little bit of loose connective tissue to hold everybody in place. The epithelial tissue, the simple squamous cells themselves, are responsible for producing serous fluid, okay, which help reduce friction within the abdominal cavity as food moves through the digestive tract. And then your parietal peritoneum would be the layer that covers the wall of the abdominal cavity. That these two layers kind of work together to also hold your organs in place. So if you really kind of think about it, you don't have a whole lot to attach these organs to kind of hold them up. Like, there's really no bones, right? If you think about your abdominal cavity, like, you've got a backbone, but you can't attach everything to your backbone. So what are we going to attach them to? You're going to attach them to the abdominal cavity itself. Okay, so like the back side of your abdominal cavity, and we have to have something to attach, and so we've got a peritoneal layer. Okay, we don't want all of, so like this sounds funny, but like we don't want all of your organs just kind of plop down in the bottom of your abdominal pelvic cavity. They don't work very well that way. We got to hold everybody in place. All right, pictorial representation of what all of this looks like. You can see your mucosal layer, that innermost layer. In the center is that lumen. We do have those three distinct components: the epithelial tissue, the simple columnar, the lamina propria, and the muscularis mucosa. Then we come to your submucosa. It's a little bit thicker. We've got some more things going on. We've got our two layers of muscle for your muscularis externa, and again you can really see that these go in a circular fashion and these go in a longitudinal fashion. And then last but not least, the serosa layer, both the visceral and parietal peritoneal layers, and then we would have serous fluid in between here. You can also see that this is where your blood vessels, your nerve fibers, your lymphatic vessels originate, and they kind of just dig their way into all of these other layers. All right, so we mentioned the two serosal layers. Okay, so these create a cavity, peritoneal cavity, and we've mentioned the serous fluid being produced by those simple squamous epithelial cells themselves. We do have a couple of options for the organs located within your abdominal cavity. Some organs are located entirely within the peritoneal cavity. We refer to this as intraperitoneal. Other organs are outside, either partially or completely. We refer to these as retroperitoneal. So your kidneys, for example, even though they're not part of your digestive tract, your kidneys sit retroperitoneal, so you'll see that term come up here and there. And then your visceral peritoneum folds over on itself around a couple of your organs, specifically, for example, your small intestine, and we can create what are referred to as mesenteries. These assist with the support system and the binding of the organs, both to themselves and to the surrounding abdominal cavity, to keep the small intestine in its particular shape, so everything fits within the abdominal pelvic cavity. So we'll eventually talk about it, but your small intestines, it's actually really, really long. It's like 30 feet or something like that. We have to make sure that fits inside of you. So we have to fold it in a very particular way. And the mesenteries allow for the proper folding and then kind of holding everything in place. And this is what we're talking about. So your omentum, we'll talk about that. But here's your mesentery. Okay, this kind of yellowish layer, I guess you'd call it, and you can see that it's attached to the small intestine as well as the large intestine also. You can see we've got quite a substantial blood vessel supply to these organs as well, and that should make sense. You can see a real image just of a good old human being. I don't know, I guess, alright, it's a cadaver. I was like, it is a human, I think. You can see all that yellow stuff. So in the image, when it's yellow, it really is yellow in real life. And then you can see the small intestines kind of popping up And you've got your small intestines popping up here as well. Okay. And last but not least, you can see the peritoneal cavity, all of the blue. Okay, the darker blue is the two different layers of the peritoneum, the visceral and the parietal layers. And then in the middle, you've got your peritoneal cavity full of serous fluid. Okay.